And I just love to drop into a place and say, what's calling me to write at this point in time? And so this book is tentatively titled Lessons from Our Time, because there are many. And then this is one of them. But anyway, please, Tez, go right ahead.
Oh, good. So, before the article went to or goes to final press, Kim and I talked about how great it would be to just host for Pathways to Peace, to host these dialogues. And only two, so this is the second and last one, but they were set up to really both give more opportunity for dialogue around living in peace in times of crisis, as well as to shape and inform our thinking about the topic before we go to press. So many of us were in this group were together in our dialogue last week. So I want you to know that we're thinking we can shorten it up to an hour, but we'll see, unless the dialogue is really juicy. And we're going to spend a little bit less time up front and with our stories to get more quickly into the dialogue. So welcome. We're just honored and delighted that you're here. We put our discussion questions already in the chat room, just so that they're there. And if you have questions that you'd rather put in the chat versus sharing, verbally, because we have enough time and not too many participants that we can actually have you share verbally, feel free to put your questions, thoughts, comments in the chat as well. So we certainly want you to fully participate. And at the same time, we've allowed 30 minutes for dialogue. And that isn't a lot of time. So all of us need to be kind of cognizant of making room at the table for all voices. So that means keep your kind of thoughts, your ideas, your responses to the questions, or anything else you'd like to say to a minute or two, so that we can make sure that everyone has an opportunity. If it begins to get too long, I'll smile and raise my hand, but I don't think I'll have to do that. So it's important for Kim and I that we really create time out of time for this dialogue. What that means for us is really that we encourage you to kind of leave all your busyness aside, to take a breath, to breathe a little bit more deeply, to settle into your chair, let your chair support you, and to open your heart and your mind to uncover what wisdom lies within. So we encourage that as we move into our time together. So as Kim and I were prepping for this time together, we realized that what a great opportunity it was for us to reflect on kind of what we've learned and what we would like to share to prompt your thinking for our dialogue. So last week, for those of you who were here, we took a little time, almost 10 minutes, each of us, to share a story about our response around survival and thrival in crisis. We're going to spend a little less time, but we still think that it's always good to kind of open up our own vulnerabilities and our own stories for a little while to prompt the dialogue and the thinking. So without any further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Kim to share a little bit about her story. I think just about everyone on this call knows Kim, but Kim has become an amazing friend, an amazing colleague. She is an author, as you know, and she is an activist, and she is an advocate for women's issues, among her many other talents. So we'd like you to put your microphone on mute, and I'm going to turn it over to Kim. Kim?
Thank you, Tez. And I just love collaborating with Tez. We've had so much fun, and it just expands this beautiful Pathways to Peace family. I'm so blessed with so many friends in this circle here. Avon's beautiful vision, Joni's beautiful vision, and all of you, each of you, for what you're doing. So, and I really do feel this is a topic. How do we live in peace during crisis that, quite frankly, is going to be around, is going to be an issue we need to deal with, I'm sure, from now on. You know, with this pandemic perhaps morphing, we've got these horrific fires on the whole West Coast. All of these kinds of crises, these fires, the pandemic can also exacerbate personal crises. So I think developing resiliency skills is going to be absolutely critical for each of us to ride the ups and downs, whether they be small or large. We all know that they're there, and sometimes they're quite large. And so it's hard to prepare for crisis. Crises never arrive in a convenient time. And so most times, it's hard to prepare for them. So to have our skills set, and I went over resiliency skills last week, I'd be happy to share them again in the dialogue tonight if you'd like to hear them. But what I thought I'd do just very briefly, firstly, is review just a few key points from last week that I think are important. One is that sometimes we can actually avoid a crisis. I can't tell you how many friends of mine don't go to the doctor every year for an annual exam. And when they feel something weird, they don't go for fear of hearing bad news. And that's called information avoidance, but people do it. And so what can happen if we avoid taking good care of ourselves, whether it be our finances, our health, our relationships, things can grow and fester. And the very bad news that we're avoiding can become worse news and develop into a crisis. So some crises can be avoided, which goes to the importance of what we talked about last week, self-care. And later in the dialogue, I'd be happy to go into some of the specifics we talked about last week, because there are many ways of doing self-care. The important thing, I think, is that each of us have this beautiful vessel, our being, our emotions, our physical self. And so we need to take as good care as we can so that we're better able to, again, ride the ups and downs of life that happen. So I think first step is taking, good care of ourselves, which we talked about last week. Another topic that was mentioned was don't let our emotions cloud our judgment. Now, I know from my personal experience with a crisis that emotions can become quite intense during a crises. And so sometimes our emotions get the better of us and we don't always make the best judgments. So it's how do we, again, try and stay balanced so that we keep the good judgment and also honor the emotions, but not let them overtake us. I think that's very important. Let's see. Oh, be aware of our thoughts. It's amazing how many of us have an inner critic. I don't know where this inner critic comes from. I've never known. Seems like just about everybody I know has one. And some self-sabotaging beliefs or thoughts. So our emotions, our thoughts are very, very important, as well as our physical well-being. So to be mindful of those self-sabotaging thoughts, I'm not good enough, I'm not whatever enough, that particularly I think a lot of women deal with. So we can talk about that since we're a beautiful group of women here, if you'd like, in the dialogue. And then, it's amazing how a crisis can really focus us on what's important. Now a lot of people are worried about, should I get my hair cut, blah, blah, blah. And suddenly, if you get a cancer diagnosis, getting your hair cut is not important. So it really is a way sometimes to focus on the things that really matter. So those were a few key points that we talked about last week that I think are important. So the question that I think, was it Katie that posed last week, was how do we turn a personal crisis into positive action? And that's a great question. And Katie, thank you for posing that. I've thought about it. So I'm going to give two brief examples because I think it's important to be specific. So on December 7th, 1994, we had our heater tuned up in our home in San Francisco Bay Area, California. And that night, we went to bed about 10 p.m., my husband, 1.5-year-old son, and I, and went to sleep. And an hour later, we thought we smelled smoke, and we jumped out of bed, and the living room was on fire. And my husband grabbed a hose and tried to put the fire out unsuccessfully. and all we could do was run outside. And the police came and we watched our house burn down. So that was obviously a completely unexpected crisis. Um, and obviously we were grief stricken, but the truth is it was a close call and we all made it out on time. So what mattered was the 3 human beings lived. And ultimately, when I really thought about it, again, all those things in our house and every item in that house I love, but when it's gone, they were things that could be replaced. So I think initially what is important, there was certainly a lot of grief, obviously. There were things that had meaning. My mom's clothes that I had inherited after she died were gone. The slides we had taken from our travels in many countries were gone. And things that had meaning, it was really sad to lose them. But what we did was we focused on the rebuilding, and we worked with an architect and we designed a home that finally was ours. The house was an older, mishmash of things. So finally we had the opportunity of creating our own home. So what we did was focus on the rebuilding rather than the loss. And yes, I think it is important to take the time to grieve because crises often bring up loss and grieving and sorrow. And so we don't want to jump over that too quickly so that we have to deal with it later. On the other hand, it was really, we saw it as an opportunity that we hadn't anticipated. We couldn't afford to build our own home at the time. So now we had the insurance money, limited as it was, to design and build our own home. So that was how we turned it into a positive step. Many gifts, many people supported us during that journey. Believe me, it was tough. It was a long process, and I totally empathize with these people in California that are losing their homes. I know what it's like to itemize every single item in your home. So note to everybody on the call, videotape every room, every cupboard, because if your house should burn down, that will be invaluable information when you're applying for the insurance. So that was one. And I'll just say the other I mentioned briefly last week, I had a very long time personal friendship that we had a big difference. And it was painful because we both cared for each other very, very deeply. And what we did was some really deep dialogue and deep listening and gave each other a lot of space. And sometimes that action might be give each other space. Because rushing to an immediate action may not be what's needed. Sometimes we know relationships may end, and sometimes maybe they've served the purpose that we've come together for, and maybe not. And so we gave each other that quality time. We also had some really beautiful deep dialogue and some deep listening, and ended up really transforming that relationship. And that's what can happen if we give it the space. We don't try and push our agenda. And the positive action was, again, the spaciousness, the opportunity to honor the other person, each other's views, and the deeper dialogue. Telling our truth wasn't always easy. And yet it was really, it's been a remarkable journey. So that's just another example of maybe moving a crisis into action. So I'm going to pass it back to you, Tez.
Perfect. So when we came up with these questions, the one that are in your chat box, the 3 discussion questions, we realized that they really shaped and informed our own thinking about and our own reflection about what we would share. And so I began with this reflection. I've lived a very long life, and I have certainly lived through many kinds of what many would perceive as crises. And so I pondered this nature-nurture question. And I found that all 3 of the questions were interrelated. So my nature-nurture question led me into kind of not only the origins of my response to crisis, but also the gift that was inherent, or the gifts inherent in my story, as well as how I turned a crisis into personal action. And so I realized in my reflection that there are some prevailing themes in my life that have meaning to me at this age today. And one of those I shared last week when I talked about the power of choice. And so I want to look and kind of speak from this nature, nurture, the origin of my response to crisis. I want to look at that through the lens of the power of choice. So, so I feel like I should give permission for people to kind of plug their ears and go la 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 la, because some of you have heard my parts of my story, and so I apologize in advance for any repeating. So I'll try to shortcut those parts and get to the point. And so, so my father died in a plane crash. He was a pilot when I was 2. And my mother died of a broken heart when I was 12. She never recovered from my father dying those many years before. And so my mother had amazingly supportive and loving qualities, but she was unable to open her heart to be able to touch me in any loving way. So I lived my entire childhood without loving touch. I know many of you know that I had my first child, which was a daughter, at 16, my second at 17, my third at 21, and my fourth at 25. I don't recommend it, but that is a part of my life story. So at 16, when I had my daughter, it was really easy initially to hold and cuddle her because she was an infant, and that was just a part of her care. She was dependent on me for that touch. But when she began to become interactive and began expressing her very powerful, independent self, which for my daughter was around age 1.5, I became aware of just how difficult it was for me to give her hugs and loving touch. I remember the day when I was 17 that I chose to push beyond my discomfort and what was familiar to me, to force myself to hug her, to cuddle her, to let her know that I loved her through loving touch. It was a choice to break that pattern. And I have to tell you, even though it sounds silly to me today, it was incredibly difficult and awkward and forced for me to confront my history and to interrupt that pattern that had become familiar to me. And so that choice to break through that, to challenge what was familiar and would have been easy, shaped and informed the entire rest of my life in every way possible. I had 4 sons after my daughter, and it became easier and easier and easier for me to hug them, hold them, cuddle them, let them know I love them, not only verbally, but through loving touch. And today, you know, I have very loving relationships with my children, their partners, my grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. And we all hug, we all reach out, and of course, we do the fist bump or the elbow, but that loving connection is very much a part of our relationships. I would not have had that had it not been for that choice. So when I think about, was it nature or nurture? Clearly, the pattern of no touch was nurture. But I do believe that I came in with some sort of awareness of what was important that allowed me to break through intergenerational patterns, which I know is true for my mother, and to not repeat that pattern. And so I've been on the planet for a good long time, and my reflections about kind of the prevailing themes that have come out of my response to crisis. There are probably many, but in this moment, I would point to three. And one is that connection and right relationship is everything. And because I did not have family of origin, it was incredibly important for me to have loving relationships in my family of creation, in my friends in my network, my colleagues, that being in right relationship is extremely important to me. And I will do everything I can to right a relationship that's out of balance. So connection, loving connection to me is everything. Secondly, that while pain is inevitable, suffering is optional. So for me, I recognize that I can choose to embrace and embody suffering and sacrifice, or I can choose a different response. And from my perspective, I can choose to not allow my own suffering, my own imprisonment by what it is I think in response to crisis. And then thirdly, we always have choice. And so again, I would close with that so much of my life I can trace back to the choices I made when I was young, sometimes a small child. But as soon as I became aware that there was something amiss, that I knew I could choose another way. And so I'm just going to leave you with kind of those what I've learned in terms of life lessons that have shaped my response to crisis. And so at this point, thank you for listening. And we're going to turn it over to dialogue. So as I said, our questions are in our chat box, and you should have them in front of you. And Kim, I think we're going to just begin with question number 1 to open up dialogue, correct?
Sure. Or let me just say, anything that somebody would like to add. So we don't want it too structured. We have the 3, it can be in any order, but this question is such a rich one. How do we turn a crisis? And we're really, it really can be, it can be financial, it can be health, it can be anything. The pandemic for some of us hasn't been as impactful as it has for others. And I'm very aware how blessed I have been in this journey and how difficult it has been for many. It is a huge crisis for many. But how do we turn these big things in our lives into positive action? And Katie, I'd also love to hear from you since you raised the question. I'm sure you've thought about it this week, and anybody. So I'm not calling on you right now, but anyone who would like to jump in with that.
Yes, please just share your top of the head thoughts with us. Who would like to go first? Just raise your hand or speak up.
Yes, Katie.
I can go since I set up. Actually, so for this, yesterday was the 2-year anniversary of my cousin passing from a heroin overdose. So, that was something as a very personal crisis. It's obviously been on my mind the last couple of days. And I have a very large family. My mom's side is Irish Catholic. There's 8,000 of us.
Wow.
Another every minute of every day. So one of the things that we kind of all did is as a family, one, came together. It, horrible as it sounds, it really just strengthened us. We're already a very close-knit family, but, took that time to really become like, even become stronger, and, just come around my cousins and my aunt and my uncle and just really be there. The other thing is that we've all kind of educated ourselves on addiction. Um, in New Jersey especially, I'm not sure how familiar you guys are with it here. It's a absolute epidemic.
Mhm.
I can think of 20 people off the top of my head that I know that have passed from overdose in the last couple years. So, it's something that we've all kind of had to take on, as we see our classmates pass and go. So we've all really tried to educate ourselves, and then just keep on top of what's going on in our legislation, trying to make sure that in the state that it stays. Right now, they actually just made it so it's free to have Narcan, no questions asked. You just go pick it up at the CVS.
Yay.
We're all trying to just really promote it and, keep that in the memory of him, because, how easily somebody can go from, a normal life to addiction is just so quick, and it takes you so fast. So that was really how we've kind of dealt with that crisis as a family.
Well, I thank you for sharing that, Katie. I think that's so wise, and how you have turned that into action is so profound. Thank you.
And
Perfect.
what you've shared, Katie, is in a sense what I shared, what Tez has shared, is that crises, as tough as they are, can have many gifts. And so it's strengthened the rest of the family. As sad as it is to lose him, it's brought the family closer together. And that's a choice. Now you're strengthened, more people, more educated. And so I've heard this line, you don't want to let a good crisis go to waste. It sounds like a terrible line, but in other words, to learn from it, to grow through it, to benefit. Conflict can be beneficial. Conflict it's a part of our daily life. How do we use it in a way that can actually deepen the relationship or whatever? So anyway, thank you for sharing that. Who else? Joni. And then Derek.
I really appreciated your examples, and I had not heard your stories. I knew about the fire, but I did not know anything about Tez's background, so thank you. And 3 years ago, my husband passed away, and then 3 weeks later, I broke my foot. And then I found out that my safety deposit box contents had disappeared, and there were a couple other things that happened. And so I was definitely in the doldrums and in a wheelchair and all that stuff. And what helped me a lot was I found someone to live in my house who could be helpful and do things for me that I couldn't do myself. And he happened to be looking for a place temporarily, so that worked out great. And he had medical skills to boot. And then I took it as an opportunity to really go deep inside, and I started journaling and doing creative projects where I really looked at what had happened, and did some reading that brought in a spiritual perspective on it, and took some online courses. We didn't have Zoom then, but there were a lot of things I could listen to and deepen my spiritual practice. And I learned to receive. I found a couple neighbors who were willing to go shopping for me, and friends that did things, everything from, picking up things for me to chopping onions and bringing me food. And I really learned to receive, and made new friends that I didn't even know I had. So it was an interesting transition. And of course, my husband's family was extraordinary, and they were really there for him when he was passing, and for me after that. So I have a lot of gratitude for the way things unfolded. Even though my foot still hurts once in a while, it's okay. I learned a lot. I have a lot of gratitude.
I remember that, Joni. I remember when you broke your foot and right after Jack's passing. And I wondered how you coped, because when you get so many things at once, it can be a little overwhelming, actually. But it sounds like you really handled that beautifully.
And I love what you said about learning to receive. I think that's one of the biggest lessons we're here to get as women, because giving is really easy. We've been programmed for that. Receiving is less busy. And Emma, you're breaking the code on that one in your generation. And in my, and in my theology, giving and receiving are the same thing and the same blessing.
Yep. Yeah, me too.
So love that.
Yeah,
And Emma,
beautiful.
did you want to add something, given I brought your name in, and then we'll catch Deborah?
Well, receiving, I understand what you're going there. Like, we receive things, but we don't give back. So my generation should really start giving back, because since now through everything, we're going to need to start giving back a lot more, because through all the losses that we received through this pandemic, with the fires in California, we're going to have to do a lot more than just receive and give. We're going to have to do more than what we are doing now. And even though that through all of this, there's like a little light that's shining through everything. It's like, you'll get through this, just one day at a time. Don't think ahead. Don't think about the past. Just think about the present. It's going through the days and just thinking, okay, I'm going to be okay today. Everything's going to be okay. I have faith in everything. So I just let God do the rest.
Yeah, thank you, Emma. That's
Thank
beautiful.
you.
I always think about the infinity symbol around giving and receiving, the energetic kind of flow. Deborah.
Oh, you're muted. Oh, there.
There we go. This is such a reminder, right? That you just don't know what a person's carrying, you know, just hear all these beautiful women who I know, and then to go deeper and hear, oh, I didn't know that about, you know, and what I would say, I mean, I almost feel like it's like you're talking about a personal crisis into action, but I feel like we're in a collective personal crisis.
Yeah.
Because we're all going through a similar thing. You can get on the phone with a customer service person and go, how you doing? And we all know what we're talking about, right? Like, it's all feeling the same. And when this happened to me, you know, it happened to all of us, but when it happened to me in my little world, I had just been going through a really tough time over the last couple of years, so I wasn't in the greatest shape. And so I felt very vulnerable to getting sick, you know, that if I was to get sick, would I be able to get through it? And also my mama passed in January, and it looked like, when you look back at it, it looked like COVID, and we will never know. And she was traveling a lot during that period of time, but it was 10 days from in the hospital on a ventilator and out. And so it was a huge loss. You know, I still look at it and say, and I think I always will, you know, my life before and my life after, my life is divided in two. And I know a lot of people feel that with loss. And I think the piece for me was that every day that I was sitting in my apartment at the beginning, I thought, okay, let's say I do get sick. Let's say I don't have the strength to handle this. What did I spend today on? What did I spend this week on? Like, if I am going to get this, I don't want to end up in the hospital and have wasted a week thinking about crappy stuff, or an argument with such and such, or not being able to, what I can't do. You know, I want to know that I did something of meaning for myself and the world today from my apartment, just in case I got sick. Which, I mean, as you know, I mean, I do this kind of stuff anyway, but it was specifically a call to action of, this moment in time is so important for me in my life, whether I hit anybody else's life or not. And it's become a continuing calling card for me that every day, may I touch somebody, may I do something for, may this day be of importance in my life, just in case, you know, I get sick. And the other thing that I would just say, I think, which is again, crisis into action, is that may we all always remember that these numbers are just there is this fallout. There is this, you know, every number, every 215,000, whatever it is now, has this repercussions and this ripple that is going through society that's so much greater. And I hope the action becomes kindness, because we're all, if we haven't been touched by it, we're about to be.
Yeah. Thank you, Deborah. That was beautiful. And yeah. And so you, but yes, beautiful. As you know, as we've kind of been together, so many of us through these times. And we often say that, yes, it's a pandemic with COVID, but there's a race relation pandemic. There's a climate pandemic. There's the threat of nuclear war. I mean, we're just getting hit so hard. And the best thing we can do is exactly, I think, what you said, which is have a sense of urgency about making a difference each day, which was so clear. Thank you. And then having compassion and empathy, and to have that action be kindness coming out of that. It's beautiful. Thank you.
And I just wanted to add that sometimes action isn't, you know, doing. Sometimes the action is, now it's learning to live with ambiguity. It's maybe slowing down, it's doing things differently, it's having patience. So, I mean, sometimes the action part can be acceptance. There are a lot of parts to it. And yet I think, you know, the intention is, you know, not to just get stuck and mired in it and feeling sorry for ourselves, more moving it forward. But again, as I mentioned, sometimes the moving it forward is giving it space, giving it, you know, just accepting that we have to live with ambiguity. We don't know what's going to happen. None of us knows what's going to happen next anyway, but I mean, during this time. And so this is a new skill for us to be with. So different types of action.
Yeah, and Kim, that reminded me too, just that so often when we think of action, we do think of doing, but perhaps one of the most important things we can do is to become, you know, to be who we are in the world, and to make that choice to just be who we are intended to be in the world. So who else would like to respond to this question, or to others?
I'll respond to this. This is Patty. You know, when I first started thinking about this whole question, I really started off thinking, well, gee, I haven't had any crisis in my life.
Patty.
I know, it's so ridiculous because my whole life seems to be one big crisis, but I think I've gotten so used to responding to them in a way that's really been good for me. My first major crisis was when my daughter was, my second oldest child, was 17. She became mentally ill. And she's been mentally ill ever since. She's 45 years old now. And one of the ways that I coped with that was that I decided, because I was on a spiritual path even then, to figure out what I was to learn from her mental illness. And I chose to do my master's thesis on that subject of what can we learn from being in relationship with somebody with a mental illness. And then when Nikki got sick, then my marriage ended. I've been married 26 years, I have 4 children. And that was kind of a shock. But I decided to continue developing myself. And at this time, I also developed rheumatoid arthritis. And I began to realize that my body was not going to be in the best of shape going forward. So I decided to use my mind, and I went back to school again and got my doctorate. And I also at that time realized that I no longer could follow the Roman Catholic teachings. So I moved on from my religion and have continued on my spiritual path. So I guess, I've just automatically, I think, just made decisions that helped me move forward in a way that was best for me. And I guess my personality, I think, is just one not to stay stuck. I don't like being there. And I had so much to learn. And I think one of the biggest things, and Tess can attest to this, is that I really learned how to receive, because I'm not very good at that. And I've always taken care of myself, my children, took care of my ex-husband. So to be in a condition that really forced me to accept help. I still have trouble with that, but I'm doing better. So that, and understanding the concept that receiving is the same as giving. So maybe that doesn't make me feel quite as self-indulged when I do receive something, that I realize the people that are giving it to me are on the receiving end too. But I guess overall, crisis is what you make it, and it definitely is a choice. And my life is very full and rich. It's not the life that I would choose right now, but it's the one that I have. And I'm in a wheelchair, and I feel that that's limited me in some ways, but in other ways, if I hadn't gotten sick, if I hadn't gotten divorced, I would not have the life that I have right now, which I'm really happy with in so many ways. So,
That's beautiful, Patty. Thank you for sharing that. I mean, that is the right attitude. It is the life. It all leads to where we are, all the positive and negative for sure. So thank you for sharing that. And I wanted to see whether Avon or Monica wanted to jump in here. You don't have to, of course, or the question about nature, nurture, or the gifts. What gifts, and we've talked a little bit about that through a crisis, a personal collective. Monica or Avon, would you like to share it all? And if not, no problem.
You always get to pass, even though we
we
want to make sure you have an opportunity to share.
We want to hear all voices, yes, if they choose to share.
I'm sorry, I missed your question.
Go ahead. We're in, you can choose any one of the questions in the chat, but I'll review them. This is a great time.
I've seen the questions. I had to miss the questions because I had to take a phone call. So I think the one that I might respond around are, what gifts have you discovered through a person or a collective crisis?
Perfect.
And since we had a very, very close friend die of COVID in March 24, and there was nothing we could do to support the family in any kind of presence of, physical presence. His wife was also home with the virus, and she had to be quarantined for 45 days. I think the gift that, I realize that you have to recognize, because we're looking at this internet world of going out there and connecting with people all over the place in a fast mode, if all the connections happen. I think the gift is really to see that there's really a progress, a time frame, a journey, a way in which you have to be present to waiting. And my gift, my own personal gift, is one of saying, I can't deal with the negative. I have to go look for the positive. I have to look for the side that, what little evidence there is of some goodness coming out of whatever the situation is. So amazingly, his wife wrote this beautiful piece. I don't know how many days, within a week of his death, and I don't even know how she did it, but it was beautiful. And she's on the journey of grieving, which does take a good deal of time. But after 6 months, we had a ritual celebration of his life within our church community, so I was able to attend that. It takes time, and if you can lean on the positive, not get burdened down by all the negative, you can move forward.
I love that, Monica. Thank you so much. And Evan, do you have anything to add at this point?
She may just
No?
be listening.
So David has joined us. Hello, David.
Well, actually, Avon took her mic off. I mean,
Oh, Avon,
she
go ahead.
unmuted, so I don't know if she wanted to say something.
Just to say that I'm in a deep listening mode and appreciating the depth of the sharing that everyone has offered to this. And it speaks not only to the personal, but to the collective in such important ways. And I'm grateful that this conversation is occurring. And so I'm just in a deep listening mode at this point.
Well, thank you, Avon.
Thank you. And David has joined us. And David, I know we're glad you're here. And I know you have a lot to share about your life work and how it connects to living in peace in times of crisis. And we don't have a lot of time. So if you could give us maybe 2 minutes or 3 minutes of your voice, we would love that. But you have to take yourself off mute. I know it's a challenge.
Yes. It's called conscious talking.
Exactly.
Well, I know Avon from, I don't know, 2014, 2012, I don't know. I interviewed her, made a whole bunch of video recordings of interview.
We still have them.
And just fell in love with Avon.
Easy to do.
And I'm glad
There
to
are
hear
many
from-
on this call that share.
Yes.
Yes, I'm glad she's here. Did you get my email this afternoon?
Yes.
I just want to introduce myself as a recovering violent person. And to me, that's the same as a peace builder.
Mhm.
That it begins with an admission that I am totally entangled in the culture of violence. I don't know if I'm on topic or not, but the disentanglement from this culture is work. It's hard work, and it's sometimes very sad and grieving work because we realize how deeply we have been conditioned into problem solving through force and aggression and domination and manipulation and all that other stuff. So,
David, just so you know, the topic we've been discussing is how do we live in peace during time of a crisis? So how do we maintain balance? How do we practice self-care? How do we, manage our emotions? But how do we deal with a crisis and learn through it and move into positive action and see the gifts that come out of it? So that's what we've been discussing. I don't know if you have an additional thought on that topic.
Well, I think it's healthy to follow one's first impulse, which is to protect oneself by hunkering down, hiding, hitting the pause button, and well, basically running away, going off to the side somewhere, just to create some safe space for yourself. But then to seriously examine how I have personally been complicit with the situation, either directly and personally, or more generally, things that I've not done that I could have done, so that I begin to see my responsibility and my connection to the crisis. I don't think any crisis is accidental or random or spontaneous. I think that they are natural consequences. And well, it's like what Martin Luther King said, any injustice to one of us is injustice to all of us, or any harm. And I think it takes a lot of preparation work to get to that ability of, I'm going to say, self-defense, but the self-defense then becomes the basis for our contribution to the healing. No, but we have to, we're in the previous call, we were talking about self-care.
Yes. Yes.
And without that, we just get bowled over, thrown under the bus, and it's like somebody else has to clean up the mess. It's just like,
Well, and David, I think last week, I think, Tez, we mentioned that for some of us of a certain age, which many of us are, not all, we were trained in the 50s and 60s to take care of others, and that taking care of ourselves was considered selfish. And so, we're, as women, very good about taking care of others. Always remember my family's dentist appointments, doctor's appointments, or sometimes with remembering myself to take my this or that is harder. I just don't think of it. So it's important that we get that we have to take care of ourselves first.
there's a Karpman drama triangle that you may be familiar with, where the impulse to rescue other people is actually a form of self defeat, and is not helpful.
Right. Right.
But there are ways to be helpful that are much more softer and gentler, and bring out from the people who are being affected their strengths, because they all have them. Like you were saying last time, we have far more strength. It was Sue Zog. We have far more strengths than we possibly can imagine we have.
Yeah.
That's so true.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So we are kind of winding down our time, but before we move into closing, I'd just like to check in with everyone if there's anything on your heart that you would like to say, any reflection before Kim and I move into kind of our closing and our thank yous to all of you. So I'm going to just call on people. And of course, you always get to pass if there are no words that need to be said. And I'm going to ask Deborah to go first. Any last reflections, Deborah?
I'm grateful for the circle, and I just am really excited to hear what you and Kim have to say right now. I'm feeling you. I'm feeling everybody. I'm feeling you. Thank you.
And Emma.
So I feel, okay, so I had a way that we can answer the first question, how can I turn a personal crisis into action?
Mm-hmm.
So in 6th grade, I wasn't having the best time. I was feeling a little bit judged, I would say, one of the words for it. But I came home every day upset and not having a very good day, which affected my mood for about the whole year. So in the middle of sixth grade, I made a big decision to change schools. So I changed schools at the beginning of seventh grade, knowing nobody. So I was nervous as anything because I was like, okay, I don't want to relive what happened in sixth grade. Plus, I want to be able to meet new people. I know the people I've been going with to school in sixth grade, I've been going since kindergarten. So I wanted to change. My parents supported me through it. My sister supported me through it. And when I went, I felt like, why didn't I go here since kindergarten? Why didn't I go to this school since kindergarten? So I went to the school and I made friends very quickly, and they didn't judge me for who I was, even though I was different. I have ADHD and dyslexia, so it's very, very hard for me to control my actions, control my words, control my anger. And sometimes I just lash out at people when they don't even deserve it. So I took that into consideration going into this new school, and I made sure that, okay, I gotta control my words, gotta control my anger. And I got through 7th and 8th grade year graduating with a bunch of friends going into high school. And then when going to the United Nations, I made more friends through going through the conferences, going through speaking, going through Pathways to Peace, going through Mr. Anthony. Going through all of them helped me control what I have to say in situations, how to not lash out at people in situations. So it really has helped me since sixth grade. So.
Oh, Emma, I am so glad you're part of the Pathways to Peace community and family. You are so wise. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So wise. Katie.
I just have to say, this has been a very relaxing, nice way to, just communicate with everyone. After the last event, I remember it was the same night as the debate, and I woke up the next morning having not watched it. And I remember thinking to myself, what a better way to spend a night than speaking with all of you and talking about just mental health and what we're all going through. And I really have enjoyed both of these talks, and I really hope you guys continue to do things like this. It's just been very nice to have a moment to just speak and get to know everyone. Really enjoyed it.
Thank you so much, Katie. And Joni. Any reflections? Joni, you're on mute. Okay. She may have.
I'm just grateful to the two of you for the topic. And it's very important reflection at this time. Thank you. I appreciated everyone's sharing.
And we appreciate you, Joni. Thank you. And Patty?
I think the only thing that comes to mind for me at the moment is that if you're going to offer help to somebody, to make sure you do it in the spirit that doesn't leave them thinking that you think they're not capable themselves.
So important.
I think that it's really important. I think especially in our society, we have given that message to many of our minority groups that, they can't do it themselves, so we have to help them. And that's so totally the opposite of the truth. And I think it's a message that needs to be put out there more often. Sometimes offering help is the easiest thing to do. And being fully aware of other people's feelings sometimes is a little more difficult.
Yeah, thank you, Patty. It's an important message. Kind of is that piece that I think David brought up about, we are all one. And so we need to approach helping in a way that does convey that everyone is equally competent to help themselves, and we need to support whatever those actions are. I think it is important. Thank
Exactly.
you. Monica, any last words that you'd like to share? Anything on your heart?
I think it was Avon that said that she was deep listening. And to me, if we would take the time to listen to one another deeply, and maybe probe, but probe, sensitive to not, not being too intrusive, I think we would learn a lot. And so I thank both of you, Tess and Kim, for calling us together in this little Zoom gathering and letting us listen to one another.
And thank you for
Thanks,
both listening
Monica.
and contributing, Monica. And Even?
Still gratitude and listening.
Okay, thank you all. Well, Kim and I both are touched. We were so touched from the last gathering, and so kind of grateful to all of you. And it feels even better for me tonight. I'll speak for myself that we're just so in gratitude to each of you for this time that you've taken to listen, to support, to lift up, to inform. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And David, I think we didn't get in your words, did we? Anything last on your heart? I'm sorry I missed you for 1 second. You're on mute.
Hi.
There you go.
Yes. My parting thought is related back actually to your last session about spiritual work. And I think all of these multiple cascading crises are teaching us as a species that work is so important to arrive at any kind of sustainable solution, anything that works. And there's a lot of resistance to that, but I'm optimistic. I think it's going to melt. Human beings do melt at a certain point.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes. And honestly, if we could put all of you into a room and just talk to one another, we could probably solve a lot of the world's crises, right? And so I'm going to leave you with a couple of quotes, and then I'm going to turn it over to Kim to wind us up. Just to remind you that Kim's new book will be coming out, in our chapter on living in peace in times of crisis will be in that. Thank you, thank you, thank you, Kim. It's a few months out, but look for that in the future. So I would close with 2 quotes. The first one from J.K. Rowling that kind of sums up for me the piece around choice. It is our choices that show what we truly are, far more than our abilities. It's our choices that show what we truly are, far more than our abilities, by J.K. Rowling. And then I would leave you with this, what feels more like a blessing than a quote from Nelson Mandela. And he said, "May your choices reflect your hopes, not your fears." Thank you to all of you for being here, to being in dialogue, and for gracing us with your stories and your spirit. Kim?
And, you know, this is a perfect example of a gift during a crisis that we're deepening our connections, we're deepening our own inner journeys during this time. It is a crisis we're all living through, and we're all figuring it out in some way together. So learning from each other's stories, helping each other out, that to me is what it's all about. So it's been so fun and meaningful. So I really appreciate everyone who's been here and what you've shared. And so I'd like to just end with a quote from Lao Tse, who it's also the same, virtually the same thing as the African proverb. So this goes, if there is to be peace in the world, there must be peace in the nation. If there is to be peace in the nation, there must be peace in the cities. If there is to be peace in the cities, there must be peace between neighbors. If there is to be peace between neighbors, there must be peace in the home. If there is to be peace in the home, there must be peace in the heart. So I think, as we all said, it starts with each of us. And well, again, thank you for participating and for what you've shared. And perhaps Tez and I will do another one of these at some point, because I think that deeper sharing is how we show care for each other. So thank you, Tez, for being my co-facilitator, and to each of you for being here.
Thank you, Kim, and thank you, all of you. Peace.
Okay, take care. Have a great evening.
Thank you, ladies.
So is there not another one scheduled?
This was our second and only one we scheduled, but I was thinking
Me
the
too.
same thing that Kim said when she said maybe we'll host another one, because this has been so delightful.
We'll
So
let you know.
yeah,
I vote for that.
and let us know if you think that you'd be interested.
Mhm.
Peace.